Hello, my name is Rachel, and for this project I've been doing the assets and the research. Confront is a game created for Tenny, which is a great service to connect trans people with the help they need along with other trans people. Our game will be showcased at an event they host in October, where trans youth from ages 5 to 17 will play along with their parents. The game follows the player who is coming out and asking for some help from their principal, family member, and doctor. While externally this looks like a normal conversation, the player is having an internal battle with the words. This is represented through a turn-based battle system, which Kieran will discuss more later. The battle is a metaphor for the battles that trans people go through in order to make their voice heard. This is also where the working title Confront comes from. My main role for this project is assets. I will be doing all the environmental and UI art. This also includes the obstacles that the enemies will attack with. Erin created an art bible that I've been following the colour palettes from. The battles are pink, the backgrounds are blue, and the characters will be purple. Myself and Kieran did some work on the design of the colours too. White means damage, and the very light pink means a special move. All the other colours are just for style. This is why the other colours have a lower alpha, to assure the player can be seen beneath and also showcase that they aren't as important. Currently not showcased is the background asset, which didn't make it into the final version just yet. I have a lot of assets left to do, along with some improvements to the current ones. The trails left behind by glue, eraser and pencil look strange while not tiled side by side, so that will need to be improved on. The pencil tile also caused the game to lag so bad we needed to make it non-transparent. These are some minor things that need to be tweaked. I also did research on Tenny for this project, finding out what they do and give us inspiration for the game. The game's ending will have the player go to Tenny and be referred to a support group for other trans people. This is a way of integrating them into the game. I've also been spreading a survey around to give to Luna to help with her narrative design.
We thought it was important to take different trans people's opinions and experiences into account while making this game, so we created a forum asking people to describe some experiences that they've had that are similar to the ones we had in game, to make sure that it's as accurate as possible.
Hey, my name's Kieran. I worked on the programming and the general overall design for Confront. I'll just talk a bit about the things that I contributed to the prototype. There's three main areas that I was focused on. So firstly was kind of overall general design. So this was an iterative process between myself and Nick, whereby I would kind of outline or kind of a design that I would imagine the game having, and then Nick would kind of have a look at this. We'd then discuss it, kind of talk back and forth about how we thought that would feel like, how we thought it would play, and then kind of refine it from there. So it was very much the two of us hand in hand kind of working on this. Uh, so another area that I worked on was the mini games. So there were two mini games in particular that I worked on. Firstly was the attacking mini game, which the player times arrow key inputs to when arrows appear on screen in order to string together a sentence. If they time the arrow keys correctly, the sentence appears in blue, which means that those words were actually said out loud, they're real, and they deal damage to the boss. If they don't time it correctly, the words appear in pink, which means that those words were not said out loud, they're still in your head, and they actually deal damage to the player instead. Then the other minigame that I worked on was the dodging minigame, which basically is not a player action, it's a boss's action. It happens at the end of each of the player's actions. And I'll try and explain this as intuitively as I can, but essentially, it increases in difficulty depending on which action the player chooses. There are three different difficulty settings, essentially: the logic difficulty, the emotion difficulty, and the passive difficulty. When the player selects a specific action, the dodging minigame that is played afterwards looks to that action difficulty to see how many obstacles it should spawn. And each time that you do select an action, the difficulty for that action increases by one, so that subsequent times that you choose that action, it will get more difficult during the dodging sequence because more objects will have been spawned. So, yeah, it is quite difficult towards later end of the dodging minigame, and this is something I would like to work on, is the difficulty ramp, in that it's quite easy at the start, which isn't necessarily a bad thing because it allows the player to get familiar with the different obstacles. However, it is quite noticeable, and towards the end, it is like really difficult, almost impossible, to avoid all six obstacles. Now, in some way, I would say this is as intended because we don't want players to continually choose the same action, so we increase the difficulty of that action afterwards to incentivize choosing different actions. But from another perspective, it is just impossibly hard once you've done an action like 4 or 5 times. Like you mightn't survive the sixth time, essentially. Um, but yeah, so those were kind of the main things that I worked on. Yeah, thank you.
So, hello, I'm Nick. I worked mainly as a programmer as well as a designer for this project on Confront. And I'll just briefly outline what I've done and what I'm going to be doing forward, and just what our plans in terms of programming as well as design are. So, as Kieran before said, I worked in conjunction with him on the design of the game. Mainly, we looked at the Kieran looked more, sorry, at the overall design, while I looked more into specificities on designing mini games and more system-wide stuff. So mainly, my job would be that I was giving feedback and polishing up the design choices that Kieran brought up, and then in a kind of interactive way, we both came up with our final design. Specifically, though, I contributed a lot to the design of text being used in the game as the primary form of a mechanic, and in particular for the mini games revolving around healing or affirmation, where the player types the text, um, as well as the passive action, where the player has to kind of destroy the text that the enemy or the boss is hurting at the player. The idea behind this design choice was that the player would have a conversation with the boss and just show as well how this conversation can affect people. I also, on the programming side of things as well, did the main setup for sequencing, setting up actions like the different mini games to be hooked up in their order and their logic essentially, or the logic for how they went forward, as well as specifically coding the text-based minigames for the passive minigame, where again the player clicks down text, as well as the affirmation mechanic, where the player kind of heals themselves by affirming themselves that different affirmations. Going forward, I think a lot of the programming work is going to be essentially refactoring existing code and working on optimizations, because on some cases the game can definitely lag a little bit, since we also want the game to run as smooth as possible. Some of the code needs to be refactored. And going forward, I'm going to be working on a lot of polishing code, specifically as well animation codes, that just give the player feedback, such as, for example, if the boss takes damage, to have the sprite kind of squish and stretch to show that, or to flicker, as well as just for when the player takes damage, for example, for the screen to distort, and just more polishing options, as well as working on setting up the sequencing for the next boss fights to go. And on the design side, it's going to be mainly working on two other sequences of the boss to go. And yeah, that was briefly my part of the project.